Wait, awesome. All right, all right. And we're live. So, Dr. Rose, while we're waiting for people to start joining in here, why don't you give a brief little introduction on yourself and your background and your vast experience as a naturopathic doctor at MedMatrix?
Sure. I'm Dr. Sasha Rose, and I've been practicing functional medicine for over 20 years now. And I'm one of the lead providers here at MedMatrix. We'll dive into the topic in a minute, but probably 9 out of 10 people that I see are dealing with some level of stress in their lives and figuring out how to handle the stressors in their life. So I think this is a pretty pertinent topic for most people.
Okay, yeah. So today we're going to be talking about the HPA axis and how it relates to and can cause things like low stress tolerance, weight gain around the abdominal area, poor sleep, feeling that wired, tired feeling, and some of the root causes and how we help patients kind of figure this out and then Matrix. And yeah, before we got in, we do got to say, none of this is medical advice. This is really for educational purposes only. If you want medical advice, you're welcome to become a patient here. We'd love to help you out. So yeah, with that said, people are going to start rolling in here. Dr. Rose, why don't you give us like a 10,000 foot overview of like what the HPA axis is and why it affects our health so much?
Yeah, why is it important? So HPA stands for hypothalamus, which is in the brain. The P is for pituitary, which is also located in the brain, and adrenal, A for adrenal. So it's basically this axis, meaning that it's a pathway, right? So the kind of starting point is the hypothalamus, and that releases a hormone, and that hormone stimulates the pituitary to produce another hormone. I'll get into the specifics in a minute, to then tell the adrenal gland to produce cortisol. And most people have heard of cortisol. Cortisol is kind of considered to be like the stress hormone. And that is made in the adrenal glands, but it's not made without kind of being instructed to by the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So part of what we practice here is root cause medicine. And so we will be talking today about adrenal health, but kind of we need to see it in the context of the larger picture. And if we suspect that there is something going on with somebody's cortisol levels, too low, too high, dysregulated, we really want to kind of back up a little bit and just kind of look at that hypothalamus, look at the anterior pituitary, make sure everything's lined up where it should be, and then we can get to the adrenal glands and we can see what's happening at that point.
Okay, so where does this all start?
It starts in the hypothalamus, and so it basically the hypothalamus releases corticotropin releasing hormone. It's called CRH, and that goes to the pituitary, the anterior pituitary specifically, and that anterior pituitary then produces ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone. That then gets sent to the adrenal glands, which then produces cortisol. And cortisol is going to be kind of go up and down depending if we are in fight or flight mode or not, if we are ideally cortisol is going to be highest in the morning. We call it a diurnal rhythm. So cortisol ideally gets triggered is triggered to be at its highest right when you wake up first thing in the morning. And it has a morning spike, and then that drops between 8 a.m. and then it drops pretty dramatically between 8 a.m. and noon. And then between noon and midnight, it continues to drop at a kind of gradual rate. being cortisol ideally being at its lowest level when we are sleeping, which ideally is during the night. So you could imagine if somebody has night shifts, for example, or shift work, that's going to be, one reason why your cortisol levels can be dysregulated.
Gotcha.
So one thing that because cortisol is one of the hormones that we test on our initial panel. And so one thing that I'm always telling patients is the time of the blood draw does matter, because there's going to be, if you come in at 8 a.m. versus 4 p.m., the normal reference range for your cortisol level is going to be different.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when we first entered the episode, we had not a lot of people here. Now we have a bunch of people here saying hi. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. If you're joining us, interact. We'd love to see the comment. Tell us where you're from. Say, hey, we love seeing you here. So we appreciate it. So for all the people who just joined, looks like we got about 25 people across platforms here. Can you just restate the connection between the HPA axis and cortisol simply?
Yeah, so the HPA axis is basically kind of like, it starts with the hypothalamus, it goes to the messenger, then goes to the anterior pituitary. Both of those are in the brain. Mm-hmm. And then the messenger hormone goes to the adrenal glands, which stimulates the release of cortisol. So the HPA axis is kind of in charge of us having a healthy cortisol or stress response.
Okay. So yeah, we talk a lot about the mind-body connection, right? So is the HPA axis something that is really addressed in conventional medicine, or is this something that's kind of like overlooked more often than not?
So if there's there's actual diagnoses that people may have heard of, like Addison's disease is an endocrine or hormonal disorder where the adrenal gland is not producing cortisol. So that's an actual that's like a clinical diagnosis. The person who has Addison's disease needs to be on kind of synthetic cortisol for the rest of their life. The opposite is Cushing's disease, which is too much. The adrenals are kind of putting out too much cortisol. And so those are like physiologic endocrine disorders. Those are obviously recognized within conventional medicine. What we see much, and those are both relatively rare. The issue with the kind of verbiage, I guess, is that people often use the term adrenal fatigue, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of thrown around in maybe the wellness community among some providers, and that's technically not. It's not really a diagnosis. It's not an actual clinical diagnosis, adrenal fatigue, because if you actually have adrenal fatigue, it means you have Addison's disease, which again, most of us do not. Mm-hmm. Usually when people use that term, what they mean is some type of dysregulation with cortisol, right? And so what you can have with, and usually the original causes for some kind of dysregulation are going to be early trauma or chronic trauma. And we have a whole other podcast with Dr. Renard on that. So I'll let people watch that one for really good information on trauma and its impacts. But trauma, as I mentioned, chronic shift work or chronic kind of night shifts, that's going to dysregulate. Chronic stress in general, kind of spending years in what many people are familiar with, of fight or flight mode, where you're kind of hyper vigilant, you don't feel safe, you never relax. That's going to affect over time the ability of the adrenal gland to produce cortisol in the optimal way, in that diurnal rhythm, high in the morning, low at night. So there's different stages of dysregulation, again, which is sometimes mislabeled or called adrenal fatigue. The way that I first learned about it was if somebody's in kind of that sympathetic overdrive space where they're always on, their system is never relaxed, their adrenals are kind of being told to just produce cortisol all the time, that's like sympathetic overdrive. That's like hyperactive, right? Or hyperadrenergic state. And that can only go on for so long before then you get to the dysregulated state where it's a little bit more, cortisol is probably kind of low in the morning when it's supposed to be high. And in that case, someone is like having a really hard time getting out of bed in the morning. It's just like, it feels almost physically impossible to get out of bed. But then come 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, 12 midnight, their cortisol is probably high when we want it to be low. And so there's a little bit of that wired, tired feeling, right? Where they know they should be sleeping, but that they're like, they come into my office and they're like, that's when I'm the most productive. That's when I get the most done. And but then during the day they're dragging. So that's like dysregulation. And then the last stage is really like a hypofunctioning or a low functioning stage where the adrenal glands are having a real hard time pushing out cortisol in an optimal way. And that's like, when we do testing, we do like a salivary test where we can map out the diurnal rhythm or the 24-hour cycle of cortisol. And that's where on that test, I'm going to see, it's going to be kind of flatlined, right? There's not going to be a morning peak. And it's going to also just be it's just going to be low all day, all night. Yeah. And there's usually some pretty significant chronic fatigue in those situations. People are rarely getting that second wind at all.
Right. And what is this patient being told in conventional medicine before they kind of come see someone like you?
You're depressed. Here's an SSRI. You just need to kind of get out more. What else? Maybe they're put on a stimulant. Maybe they're put on, or maybe they're not really told much at all, right? Like with the testing that conventional medicine usually offers, the testing that's usually going to be, again, kind of covered by somebody's insurance is usually not going to include a hormone panel. It's not going to include a cortisol test. And it's certainly not going to cover like a salivary cortisol test. So the person doesn't even have any information about how their adrenals are doing or how that HPA axis is functioning. They just know that they're exhausted all the time. And they might be drinking a pot of coffee to get through the day.
Right. Yeah. What is like, you do this well. I actually so excited to hear your answer to this. Like, describe that patient to me, like everything they're going through. And I imagine there's actually a couple like avatars of this patient. Like there's probably the busy mom who's got the kids and the job and the stress, right? And then there's probably the person who has health issues. And then there might even be the busy executive. So can you kind of explain the different types of people that have lifestyles that lead to this kind of dysfunction and dysregulation?
Yeah, I mean, actually, sometimes I like that, like the avatar. Like sometimes it's the guy in his late 20s who has a pretty intense job. He's kind of moving up the corporate ladder, and he also goes to the gym every day, and he like works out like 3 hours a day before he goes to work. He's probably doing some energy drinks to get through the day. And then his work day is just like boom, boom, boom. He's like in sales. He's just on all the time. And so 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, where physiologically it would be ideal for him to start winding down and going to bed, he kind of can't, right? Like he's just on, whether it's the chemical stimulants or maybe what I would call kind of overtraining at the gym. He's just kind of asking so much of his adrenal glands. Like there's so much cortisol being pumped out. He's in sympathetic drive like all the time. And he's going to feel pretty good for a little while, and then he's not. Right. And then the sleep deprivation is going to get to him, and the poor like physical recovery from the overtraining is going to get to him. And it's going to kind of switch into maybe more anxiety than feeling like pumped up. And things just kind of, we need with that cortisol regulation, we need the downtime too, right? We don't just need the energy that we get from cortisol. We need the parasympathetic part, not just the sympathetic. So that's one example. That's kind of like what we would clinically look at and be like, there's some high cortisol right there. And then, there is like the stressed out mom. There's the mom that works, a full-time job, has 3 kids, is head of household. might be caring for an aging parent along the way, and you know, somehow in there is driving the kids to soccer practice and picking up the groceries and trying to do it all. And she is dragging, like she is exhausted, right? She is, you know, she's the one that I'm having the conversation with, who's like, I haven't been able to fit exercise in. I can't remember the last time I actually exercised. And she's like, and I'm gaining weight and I can't seem to feed myself anything other than the chicken nuggets that I feed my kids every day. I don't, and hers is less of that kind of, it's blended, it's kind of morphed into this fatigue at this point. And she is doing everything. She's productive. She's getting stuff done. And if you just met her running into her at a dinner party, she would seem totally fine. But inside she's exhausted and can sleep 8 hours and still feel exhausted.
Yeah, we hear that all the time.
Yeah.
On the patient coordinator end. Here's the $1 million question though, like what do you do? Like what does that mom do? What does the dad do? Like what is the person in that position where they have all these life responsibilities and they have to work, they got to take care of the kids, they got to, you know, take care of the house. They can't just stop, you know what I mean? They can't just go on a week silent retreat and reset. Like how do you actually help this person and get them back in balance?
Yeah, it's a great question and it's not easy, and it's going to be a little bit different for each person, which is kind of where we excel, right? We kind of take the time, we have the time to really personalize it. One thing that I like to say to people is just what you said, which is that we can't necessarily change the external circumstances of our life. Like we have these things that feel like stressors right now. We have these responsibilities. We don't always have control over changing those, but we do have control over our internal response to them. Now, sometimes it does take somebody making some decisions and having some boundaries and cutting things out that she doesn't or he doesn't have to do. And, you know, working with a coach or somebody to kind of prioritize and actually like prioritize her own health, which generalization here, but women seem to have a harder time than men doing that. Where we come in is how do we optimize sleep? How do we support the adrenal glands in terms of optimizing cortisol regulation? So that salivary test that I mentioned is sometimes a good baseline. Again, we do on our initial blood work, we do kind of test it in the blood. And then if I want a full 24-hour picture, I will order that salivary test, which gives me an idea of what's happening in the morning when this person is waking up, what's happening at night when she or he should be sleeping. We might do some botanical medicine. There's some great, there's a category of botanicals called adaptogens or adrenal adaptogenic herbs. And those can kind of have either a calming effect or a stimulating effect, depending on where the person is in that gradient of cortisol dysregulation. Those can be really beneficial. We have some peptides that are also really good for neurotransmitter balance, cortisol regulation, safe. Even if somebody's already on an antidepressant, totally safe to take those peptides with those medications. And then we're looking at other like nutrition wise, like is this person in this kind of, I'll call it a dysfunctional relationship with caffeine, right? Like completely dependent on caffeine, and yet they have to keep consuming more and more to even keep their eyes open. Like we do need to work on that, right? We do need to figure out other ways for them to feel productive. So there's kind of coaching along those lines, looking at sugar intake, kind of these things that they're going to in the moment because they're exhausted or addicted, but really not serving them. So nutrition wise, and yeah, even physical movement, like the guy that's addicted to go to the gym that I would say is overtraining, like that guy could probably use a yoga class or a Pilates class. He's going to hate it, right? He's going to be like, that I'm not sweating. What's the point? Like his nervous system, his adrenal system, he needs movement like that.
So the
right?
busy executives, the moms, like that's where yoga is less of a fitness thing and more of a mind thing for those people.
It can be fitness for sure, but you're getting the breath work in, you're getting like you're tapping into that relaxation part, not just the boom boom, like kind of the classic, like I'm just going to keep pushing my body as hard as I can go.
Yeah.
I'm just going to kind of sweat and I'm just going to exhaust myself, right? Like that's kind of the American way, and we need a balance. Like we need that. We need to sweat and we need to push ourselves, but we also need like the deep breathing and the stretching and for mental, emotional, and physical well-being. But it's the people that like really resist, those are the ones that need it the most.
Yeah. I hate to insert myself in these
Oh, do you fall into that category?
Well, no, I mean, I definitely am the guy in his 20s who works like, 70 hours plus a week, gets up early, works out. Like I definitely fall in that category where I should have some cortisol issues, but if you look, when I did the cortisol test, it was pretty much perfect.
Pretty normal.
And
Nice.
I noticed I have this ritual every Sunday. I do a sauna and ice bath, and then I meditate for like an hour. And I just realized when I do that every Sunday, it's just like, I just feel so much more balanced throughout the week. And I just did it because like, it just felt good and I feel good throughout the week, but that's probably what's happening kind of under the hood that I didn't even realize the benefits of that. And I do realize when I don't do that and I work all day Sunday, like I feel like I'm behind. I just feel like I'm always trying to keep up. So, interesting stuff.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah. So let's talk about coffee. Something a lot of people love. I love coffee. What does a healthy relationship with coffee look like? Caffeine too. Let's throw energy drinks in there. I know a lot of people drink those.
Yeah. I mean, I think energy drinks have some other issues. We see a little bit, when people kind of become a little bit more addicted to those, you do start to see some like impact on your kidneys and your liver potentially, which we don't usually see with coffee. But usually if everyone's different. Okay. Everybody responds to caffeine differently. Part of that is that we all have different metabolic pathways, primarily in the liver. So some of us react pretty strongly to a small amount of caffeine, right? So everybody knows that person who even a small amount of caffeine will give them the jitters. And other people who, again, can, at least they say they can drink a half a pot of coffee and then they can go take a nap. So that's largely genetic, actually, like how we kind of handle caffeine, alcohol. So there's not one size fits all in terms of what's the right amount of coffee or caffeine for every person.
Is there a hard stop though? Is there like hey, if you're drinking 4 cups of coffee in the morning, like that's...
Yes, I don't know that that's good for anybody. I mean, that to me is dependence, right? Like that to me is that you probably do have like a cortisol dysregulation issue. You probably your sleep probably is not optimal and you are relying on that. Usually if somebody has 1 to 2 cups, I'm like, that's probably fine. And they don't fit, and they're not coming to me because of anxiety or insomnia. 1 to 2 cups is usually kind of in general a healthy amount.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. You're saying what was that what you were saying when you were saying in my clinical practice?
Yes. That usually if when I ask them about coffee or caffeine intake and they tell me 1 cup in the morning, maybe a half a cup, but nothing afternoon. And they say that they fall asleep pretty well. They stay asleep pretty well. And again, they're not dealing with high levels of anxiety or panic disorders. Then usually that tells me that their body is handling that amount of caffeine fine.
Gotcha. Okay. In your clinical opinion, when should most people stop drinking coffee? At what time of day?
I think in general, around noon. Other people maybe 3 p.m. This is assuming that this is somebody that does not, is not working third shift or does not have to be kind of at their most productive and alert at 8 p.m. at midnight. So those people are the exception, like the nurses, the truck drivers, the et cetera, like they can't follow these rules. Like they need to kind of be on a different schedule. But for those of us who want to be asleep between, 10 and 11, 10 and midnight, and we want to be waking up between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m., usually stopping caffeine either by noon or 3 p.m. if you're not as sensitive to it.
Okay. Here's a wild question in the show notes. How does gut dysfunction play a role in the HPA axis imbalance? So essentially, how does our gut affect our ability to deal with stress, right?
Yeah, so part of it is the HPA axis. Part of it also is something that we talked about, I think, in the estrobolome podcast, which is about more neurotransmitter, specifically like serotonin and serotonin receptors, and the high number of serotonin receptors that are in the gut. So that is those neurotransmitters are gonna be a big part of the stress response, in addition to cortisol and these more adrenal hormones. So that's just to kind of have the broader context of it. But I think that part of it is, part of it's a little bit more of, I guess I'll go back a little bit to liver, which is part of the digestive system. And the liver is in charge of metabolizing cholesterol. We actually need cholesterol to make pregnenolone, which is like the mother hormone that gets broken down into both our sex hormones, it's testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, and our adrenal hormones. DHEA is actually an adrenal hormone, DHEA and cortisol. So you need cholesterol. You need your liver to be functioning well, which is a huge part of the digestive system, impacted, as we know, by the gut microbiome. It's all kind of interrelated. If the liver is functioning optimally, it's going to produce cholesterol, and therefore we're going to get kind of the raw ingredient hormones to then get optimal levels of cortisol. So that's kind of one, in addition to the neurotransmitter serotonin piece, that's kind of partly where the gut HPA axis comes together. Gotcha. I will say one thing too, and this is another topic for another day, but sometimes when people are on medications that are chronically lowering their cholesterol, we wonder about the impact it has on the body to then produce some of these hormones, right? Like if you're kind of lowering the cholesterol, you're potentially making it a little bit harder to come up with pregnenolone, and therefore all of those hormones that come after that.
Okay, gotcha. What other medications might affect the HPA axis?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, I think that sometimes medications that are given for like the right reasons can have sometimes negative consequences. So sometimes some of the medications given for ADD and ADHD, so the stimulants, they can make it, you're kind of in some ways putting the body into that hyperactive HPA axis, kind of that higher sympathetic drive, right? That's what makes you kind of alert, productive, focused. And it's like a false way to do that. And that's going to kind of confuse your natural axis. Sometimes some of the antidepressants, some of the anxiety medications are going to interfere with that normal hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal road. It's going to kind of mask things and kind of put the body, I think, in this chronically dysregulated state with the person not really being able to tell anymore, because symptoms are somewhat masked.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Gotcha. How often do you see that in your clinical practice with patients?
A fair amount. I mean, medications for anxiety, medications for ADD, medications for depression are prescribed pretty commonly. I think sometimes you've heard me talk about the toolbox. I think that's one of the, unfortunately for a lot of providers in our current healthcare system, that's kind of some of the only tools available to them, or what they feel is available. And it's an easy prescription, and somebody comes in depressed, anxious, tired. That's the go-to, right?
Yeah. And why is that?
That's the only thing in the toolbox, right? So
Why is the toolbox? I think a lot of people
Oh.
kind of go functional medicine, and because it's common sense, right? It's like you don't want to cover up things with drugs. There's nothing in life that you want to just cover up and postpone to later. It's like every time you do that, when you ignore issues, they get worse. So I think a lot of people are confused, like why what we're doing is not more mainstream. So like, why is that?
Are you saying why is our form of medicine not mainstream, or why is mainstream medicine the way that it is?
I guess both, because I guess that answering one kind of answers the other.
Yeah. So, I mean, bigger context of kind of, why in conventional medicine, in the insurance model, why are the visits 7 minutes long, 15 minutes long? And really they're just kind of that there's just inherent limitations there. Versus, our visits, which are 60 minutes and 30 minutes. And we can kind of, again, somebody comes in with fatigue. I have the beauty of time to not just look at the blood work, the results of the blood work, and like get into their health history, but really like figure out for this individual person, like, what is it, right? Is it a micronutrient deficiency? Is it a cortisol dysregulation issue? Was there early childhood trauma that has not been resolved? Are they currently in a living situation where they don't feel safe? Is it nutrition? Like, there's so many. I have the time to kind of like figure that out. Conventional medical visits do not have that. And so why is that not the norm yet? It doesn't fit into the insurance model, probably is the simplest answer.
Okay, gotcha. And most people don't know, but why is the insurance model like why is it that way with the insurance model where it doesn't fit?
It's all about economics. I mean, it's productivity. So the more billable hours, the more billable procedure, it's all about kind of out of one provider, one physician's hour, how much can you bill for? And you're going to bill more if that provider sees 6 people an hour versus 1.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about the way your immunity. Let's talk about this first. So like, someone who has adrenal fatigue, or is that someone who's going to get sick more often, have immunity issues, and kind of vice versa? If someone who has a really good immune system, is that someone who doesn't have adrenal fatigue?
So it's this idea of like, when I first learned about this, it was like the different stages. And again, adrenal fatigue is not really the clinical term, but it's kind of, I think it does give us an idea of what we're kind of talking about, even though it's not technically the right terminology. Mm-hmm. What stage of adrenal fatigue is this person in? If it's a hyperactive HPA axis, hyper, like high cortisol output, that person is going to basically, that could be due to chronic physiologic stress, inflammation, infection, like I said, overtraining, early trauma. So what we're going to see potentially is like the elevated salivary or serum cortisol. That person is going to, like, if that goes on for a long time, they're probably going to start getting infections more frequently. So there's going to be a little bit of more likelihood to get infections.
Okay.
Over time, if that goes on for like a long time, it's going to, again, the adrenals aren't going to be able to sustain that. And so you're then going to get that hypoactive HPA axis or low cortisol output. And that's more of like the long-term, like burnout, really feeling depleted. You're going to, again, on the serum or the salivary test, it's going to be low, or especially in the morning, it's going to be low, or what we call like a flattened cortisol curve. And low stress tolerance, even things like low blood pressure, low blood sugar, obviously fatigue. And that person too might not have the best immune, they might have a hard time as well. They might get sick, but it's going to be a little bit more of like, it could actually turn into more of like an autoimmune. It's not that they're getting frequent acute infections, but they are more prone to more of a chronic autoimmune. Like it's gone a little bit deeper, I guess. We think of like an acute infection as a little more superficial. You kind of get over it, whereas autoimmunity is a deeper dysregulation in the immune system.
Okay. What about the relationship, like earlyhood trauma versus trauma given, something traumatic happening in life? So how does earlyhood child trauma play a bigger effect on the HPA axis than, trauma later in life?
Adult trauma?
Yeah.
Well, your system is still forming. Your neurotransmitter regulation, your the stress response, like it's all malleable in your early years. It's all you're learning, right? Like the pathways are not yet set. And if a young person does not feel safe, and so they don't feel safe in their own home, they don't feel safe at school, they don't feel safe wherever, say they don't have a safe place, then that's what is learned and that's what is embedded. And we are wired to survive. And part of how we survive is that high cortisol output. It's that being hypervigilant. It's staying alert. It's looking out for danger. And that becomes wired. That becomes embedded. And that's just how that person's going to, later in life, they might know intellectually, rationally that they are now in a safe place. But those formative years were formative, and it takes a lot. It can take therapy, medication. You can go into the different kind of ways to unlearn that. And for that person to be able to feel safe on a, not just like a mental level, but actually like those physiologic changes where we actually see the cortisol start to regulate again. And we see, the cortisol is now able to drop at night, where for the first two decades of this person's life, cortisol was high all night long because they had to stay alert. And it takes time, but we can do it. We can start to regulate that. And the person can physiologically, physically actually feel safe.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's great that you're talking about this, because I think a lot of patients kind of go to conventional medicine and they, are brushed off, or that is not talked about, and they never actually get better because they never talked about. We say this all the time. It's kind of cliche, but the root cause of like why someone doesn't feel the way they want to feel in their health.
Right. And it can be frustrating because they are like, I'm in a happy marriage and I have an amazing life right now. And I know that I am not in danger. And yet, why do I go to bed at night and I lie there with my eyes wide open?
Yeah. All right. Let's see here. I got a couple more show notes. Well, I guess for this question, let's give some context. So what is mitochondrial dysfunction first?
Mitochondrial dysfunction. So the mitochondria is what's called an organelle. So it's one of the parts of a cell. So every cell has like there's like a nucleus. Well, there's also a mitochondria, and mitochondria is kind of most well known for energy production. So if you go back to your days of biology, we learned about like how ATP is produced. That's all done in the mitochondria.
Okay, so what does mitochondrial dysfunction mean? Like if you see a patient, also how can you tell if a patient has mitochondrial dysfunction? Just curious.
So, well, sometimes if there's chronic fatigue, again, that's a tough one because there's so many causes, but sometimes there's like literally not being enough energy produced on a cellular level. And that is often kind of it can be for different reasons, but it can be a micronutrient deficiency. Like that production of ATP needs certain cofactors, certain ingredients. And if those are deficient in the diet, or if somebody is taking a medication that is depleting the mitochondria of those necessary ingredients, then there's going to be suboptimal energy production. And that's going to impact all aspects of somebody's health, including maybe energy. So sometimes with chronic fatigue, when we're kind of really, again, trying to practice root cause medicine, figure out why, we want to look at cellular health and look at mitochondrial health. And what was the second part of your question?
I guess how do you know?
Other than
anecdotally, like, hey, I'm tired, but how can you test or know more certainly that someone has mitochondrial dysfunction?
Yep. So there are some advanced tests that kind of can, where we can kind of assess whether it's, there's some genetic tests that can show us kind of what's happening at that level of the mitochondria. There's, again, some micronutrient tests that can tell us what's happening with that energy production, and we can therefore kind of deduct that there's an imbalance in the mitochondria. And I think those are kind of the big ones.
Okay, gotcha. Now that we have context on what mitochondrial dysfunction is, how does that intersect with HPA access and balance?
Say that again.
How does your mitochondrial health related to the HPA access?
So part of it is that if stress is chronic, right, and so cortisol is really high most of the time, you're going to kind of burn through a lot of that cellular energy, right? You're going to kind of stress, for lack of a better term, the mitochondria. So basically you're kind of like burning through all of that energy that the mitochondria is producing, or that the pathways within the mitochondria are producing. And eventually kind of without that proper balance, that's when you're going to kind of lose that energy production on a cellular level. So kind of burn through it, I guess, is kind of the easiest way to think of it when stress is chronic.
Okay.
You're going to become depleted on a mitochondrial level, on a cellular level.
Okay. Gotcha. That was a good explanation. Thank you. Hey guys, everyone in the comments, we appreciate you for those who've been sticking around. We're going to try to do a little bit of Q&A here. This one's going to be a little shorter today. So if you have any questions you want to ask Dr. Rose, that can be broad, comment them right now and we'll get to them. Whether you're on YouTube or Instagram, shoot those over right now. So let's start talking patient case studies. So why don't you give an example of a couple patients who have had HPA access dysregulation, adrenal fatigue that you actually helped as far as like with a more functional approach. If you could just explain like, the background, what they had tried, and then versus like kind of like where they ended up, that would be great.
Sure. So I have a patient who is she's either 69 or 70, but somewhere around there. And she came to us primarily because of chronic fatigue, right? Like years of just feeling fatigued. Her story is that she married relatively young. She had 4 children. She kind of did it all in those early years. You know, I think she had a part-time job. She raised 4 children. They're all grown now, obviously, and kind of powered through, you know, and then children are gone. Life is slower, and she kind of realizes in her 60s, early 60s, just how tired she is. And again, kind of classic, doesn't matter if she has it. Sometimes she sleeps well, sometimes she doesn't sleep well. It doesn't seem to matter. She's just kind of dragging all the time. She can get up for breakfast, and then after breakfast, she can just go back and take a nap. She hasn't had answers, right? Like, again, went to the doctor, everything is normal. Not really given any, just you're getting older, basically. It's just age, right? Like, don't expect to feel like you did when you were 30. You're 70. And she comes to us, and we saw on that initial blood work, we saw that her cortisol was low, and we saw that her vitamin D was low, and we saw that her B12 was low. We also saw that some things were normal when we're looking at fatigue, like her thyroid panel was totally normal. It really wasn't her thyroid that was causing the fatigue. So we did the salivary test on her, and it came back and it was flatlined. It was a flattened curve. So she was not getting that spike in the morning that she needs, and she was low, even lower than she should be the rest of the day. And as I'm getting to know her over these visits, we start kind of talking about early childhood. And it turns out she had a pretty dysfunctional family growing up, some trauma. Now, in that generation, there wasn't a lot of, for a lot of people and a lot of families, and the culture, I would say even 20, 30, 40 years ago, was like, you just kind of suck it up and you deal with it. You push it under the rug, you get on with your life, right? We didn't have kind of the awareness at that time of really kind of dealing with trauma like that and processing it. So she never had those tools. She just went, she raised her kids and she kept on going. And so part of it was just kind of her identifying that she most likely had, by the time I saw her, she had kind of moved through those stages of adrenal fatigue. She had gotten to the point where her adrenals were no longer even making cortisol. And so part of it was a referral to a really good psychotherapist, and then improving some of the micronutrients, the B12, the vitamin D. I always call that kind of like low-hanging fruit. It's like really easy to do. It can make a real difference. And some of those adaptogenic herbs, right? Those adrenal adaptogens were really helpful for her. I think that was the gist of it. I think she had felt so tired. She wasn't really moving her body. I had her just start to do some gentle walking, some gentle stretching, nothing too much, but enough to kind of start her with some kind of movement.
Yeah.
And then over the next few visits, like, it wasn't overnight. It wasn't like she came back to me 3 months later and said she felt like $1 million, but she did. Every time I see her, she does feel more and more energy, and she is kind of working through some of that stuff, and she is just starting to kind of come into herself a little bit more, and just walk through the day with more energy. So that was kind of an example of targeting the cortisol piece, and trying to help rebalance that HPA axis.
Gotcha. Great one. Thanks for sharing. People like that question. Okay. Let's see if I can put this up here. There we go. Cool. How would you recommend when someone has gone through all the conventional medical doctors and haven't saw it or found resolution, where would you recommend they go next?
You mean other than here?
I guess, yeah. It's probably can answer that.
I guess, yeah, it's hard for me to say. I mean, I feel like, if you're not in the area here, if you're not in Maine or New Hampshire, then finding a functional medicine practice where you can get more testing and where people are trained to dig deeper and where you're going to have, an hour with the provider right off the bat, for example. And so hopefully in that hour, you can start to kind of unpack things a little bit.
Cool. Ryan is in New Hampshire. Ryan, yeah, we can take patients from New Hampshire. You would just have to drive to our South Portland office to do the initial lab testing and the body scan, and then the follow-up appointments can actually be telehealth. And we do have a satellite office in North Conway, New Hampshire that we can do blood draws at for follow-ups. So yeah, and actually with that was actually perfect timing. We do have a special. We love when patients, non-patients take time to actually educate themselves about this stuff. So if you click that link right now, it's in the comments. Let's see if I can do this too. I can put a QR code up. If you scan the QR code or click the link in the comments, you can actually get $200 off as a new patient. We don't normally discount it that much. If you book a new patient consult, free consult before 7 p.m. using that link, you can get the $200 off, but it stops at 7 p.m. sharp. So definitely, if you are on this and you're interested in becoming a patient, you don't have to be like, I want to become a patient. Like if you're just curious, you want to talk to someone from our team, see if we can help you, just click the link below. Team's awesome. And yeah, I would definitely recommend doing that. All right, we got one more question here, and then we're going to call it a wrap. I'm going to add this to the stage. Dr. Rose, why don't you read this? And also, guys, just for context, we can't give like specific advice for you as an individual. So Dr. Rose will kind of broaden it so she can answer it more generally. And because again, we're not giving medical advice. This is for educational purposes.
So this person asks, hello, I had blood work done recently, showed my cortisol levels spiked at night when I'm sleeping, and they slowly go down in the morning. And then around 11 a.m., it drops right off. I eat very healthy. So again, this is what we would call dysregulation, right? So there's like those 3 stages where there's cortisol's high all the time and not dropping at night. And then the other extreme is the hypofunction, where like that case that I just mentioned, she really had a flat line, no bump up in the morning. And it sounds like this individual is kind of in the middle, right? So spiking at night when it's supposed to be low when they're sleeping, and then it sounds like not getting that morning spike when you're supposed to get it. So that's just a good example of the importance of kind of doing this testing. It sounds like it was probably, I guess if it was blood, I'm not sure how you got those on blood work. Usually it's salivary, but regardless, that's kind of a good example of that dysregulation. So, I mean, what to do about it, that's kind of what we just talked about. And that's why it's kind of important to meet with somebody so you can get a real personalized plan.
Yeah, big guy. Use the link. You can copy and paste it in your browser. And then, like I said, just talk to someone from the team, see if we can help. It's a free conversation. And if we can't help, where everyone at the office is really connected, we'll do our best to kind of point you in the best direction. We just want to make sure, everyone's getting taken care of. Okay, let's do one more for fun because this one's short. And broaden this one up. So severe diabetic, uncontrolled for 18 years. What like when a patient comes in and they're severe diabetic, uncontrolled for 18 years, what's your like, what's going through your head? What are the things, what are the blood markers you're looking at? What are the, what's your strategy here?
Well, we're looking at the hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month average. It's a 3-month average of your blood sugar. That's the best biomarker around blood sugar. We are also looking at insulin. So if insulin is really elevated, then that means that there's insulin resistance. And yes, So those are the most important ones. I'm assuming type 2, not type 1 with this individual. And what's the next question? What are we doing about it? Or what's the next question?
What's the strategy here?
Well, I mean, I think initially it's somewhat not super different than hopefully what would be done in a conventional medical practice, which is diet, exercise, and using tools to kind of get that blood sugar down, right? So there's GLP-1 medications, which are kind of some of the best, I think. And then there's your more traditional, maybe the person needs insulin, maybe even something like metformin. But usually the approach is to kind of address that, figure out why it's been uncontrolled. Is it a behavior issue? Is there something else going on? Sometimes chronically elevated cortisol can contribute to blood sugar dysregulation. It can be a part of it. So it's part of why it's important to kind of look at the whole hormonal picture, not just blood sugar, not just insulin. So that can kind of play a role. But usually my approach is, let's try to get that hemoglobin A1C as close to 7 as we can. And then figure out what's going to work kind of long-term maintenance. Are there other factors going in? Is there a behavior issue? But the sooner we can kind of get that controlled, the better.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, that's a great place to end it. We're kind of time here. Big Kai. Yeah, again, everything we do is really personalized. So we're not going to be able to give you like an exact quote on like what it would cost. That's why we have the discovery call in place. For those who are wondering, if you're curious about working with us as a patient, general cost looks like $300 to $500 a month throughout the year, kind of for like that comprehensive care. It's kind of like a rough ballpark average. But yeah, the first step is definitely just that free call. And like I said, if we're not confident we can help you, we'll help you find another place that can. But yeah, with that, guys, if you're just joining us or you're again considering copy and paste the link in the comments, scan the QR code in the live. Doctors, anything you want to take us home with, leave the audience with before we sign off?
Just that a lot of people come in and they say, I think I started it this way. Maybe they say, I feel like I must have really high cortisol. And then we're going over the blood work and their cortisol is either normal or low. And they're surprised because they're like, I'm stressed out all the time. I thought my cortisol was going to be really high. And I hope that we have learned in this podcast that it's nuanced, right? And that there's different types of cortisol dysregulation, adrenal fatigue, dysregulated HPA axis issues. So it doesn't mean that you're not stressed. It's just, where are you in that continuum? And I hope you also have learned that there's ways that we can start to balance that.
That's awesome. All right, guys, we go live every 2 to 3 times a week. So if you like this, you want to come to future ones, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, to Instagram, wherever you're watching this right now. And Spotify, Apple, you can watch the recordings. We have so much great content around health. Definitely check it out. All right, guys, have a wonderful evening. Dr. Rose, thanks for your time.
Thank you.